What does it take to achieve this unprecedented goal? It takes commitment, grit, and determination, rolling up our sleeves and having conversations. It takes dedication and faith. It takes strength, an indelible spirit, and the need to serve a greater good. It takes you. It takes more than 1,000 partners from as far west as Hawaii and as far east as Puerto Rico. Dedicated members of our consortium, frontline staff, program staff, community leaders, site managers, phlebotomists, principal investigators, researchers. It takes your hard work and resilience, kindness, respect, and dignity. With your help, one by one, 500,000 generous individuals have joined us so far. People from all backgrounds who've answered the call, brothers and sisters, grandparents, cousins, nurses, teachers, farmers, cooks, willing to give of themselves. But we're just beginning to realize our dreams. It takes a deep understanding of genetics and genomics, the social determinants of health, and everything in between. It takes embracing our diversity, the key to unlocking medical breakthroughs. It takes an unprecedented amount of data to unearth discoveries, and a unique tapestry of people sharing their stories. It takes 1 million people coming together, taking care of each other by participating on a journey we started 5 years ago. This is what unity looks like. This is the future of health. What will it take to realize our bold dream and lift each other up in health for generations to come? It will take all of us.
What drew me to the All of Us research program was the excitement of using genetic information to understand human disease. And I was very enamored with the program from the moment that President Obama launched it back in 2015 as the Precision Medicine Initiative, because I saw the future of our capability to use genetics to understand our health. As a researcher, my excitement about working with the data that the NIH All of Us program is generating is that it will be one of the most diverse data sets that we can access. Currently, genetics research is hindered by the lack of diversity because discoveries that are made don't apply to all the populations that are represented in our nation.
Genetics can change the way you see yourself, the way you see your fellow citizens, and that's a good thing. I went to, segregated elementary, junior high, and high schools. But when I went to college, that's when I saw people of European descent. Got interested in looking at human phenotypic variation. So when I heard about All of Us, I said, we finally have the tools to see the person as a whole person. The All of Us research program is the best opportunity for finding fulfillment for researchers of color who are interested in human evolutionary biology. By expanding the database to include so many diverse populations, the opportunities for research, for comparative studies, for integrating populations together is unlimited. And I came to Howard to help the students in service. And so All of Us has really made that even more meaningful. This is the first year that we've had the All of Us Researcher Academy Award at Howard. And I have a team, undergraduates, graduate students, postdocs, MDs, and we collaborate on papers. Right now we're working on 7 papers, and the All of Us Academy has made resources available to us that were not otherwise available. There's a connection with RTI. so that we have people who can help us with our computational needs. Nature's editors have said they'll look at our early papers and give us advice on them. So this is not something that Howard or any other HBCU has had available. The presence of the resources from all of us have allowed me to be a better mentor to these students. It's highly significant seeing people that look like you, that are aware of your values, share those values, and can work with it even more. I am so grateful that it has dawned on the powers that be to tap into the wealth of this country that is our diversity. That's what makes us so special. We all have something to learn from each other, you know? And this is why I think that what all of us does is it facilitates that opportunity for learning from each other.
So much of what we've done in medicine over the years has not really taken into account individual differences, and this is an opportunity to be part of something historic.
Most studies and most clinical trials have always been with the average white male. So as we start thinking about this in the context of building trust, I think we get back that trust by involving the community. Not saying you come to us or we'll just do things to you. We're going to do things with you and in fact allow that information to be accessible to you, the individual.
You're going to have some individuals that are going to say, yes, good, we're getting in on the ground level of a study. And then you're going to have those that have some trepidations about it. My thing is to bring them aboard and let them know that this is for the greater good for them. We have input, and without input, there's no buy-in. And without buy-in, there's no commitment. Without commitment, there's no success.
Tuskegee happened. We're not trying to hide that or sweep it under the rug, but communities of color will be at a disadvantage if we do not find ways to get by that. Whether the focus is asthma, whether the focus is infant mortality, whether the focus is diabetes, cancer or heart disease, communities of color are disproportionately impacted by them.
It has always been playing catch up to make sure that they're even getting access, much less minimum service. Low income, underserved, and people of color are oftentimes very generous in giving something if they understand it. And they always do so with the intention that knowing this is not just about me, this is not just even about my family, it is about helping the community down the road.
Being able to bring the Asian American population who is never at the table, not only to contribute to science, but to contribute to our ability to understand the nuances within those populations. I think it will provide a huge national data set so we can ask questions and make discoveries about healthcare that will better their own personal health and those of the communities that they are part of.
Diversity strengthens the science. It could bridge some civil rights issues and inequities in healthcare across all races and ethnicities and culture.
As a community of color, underrepresented, hidden, underserved, what would happen if you were not at the table? It is an issue of equity and it's an issue of justice as well.
It is important for minorities to be a part of this, or we will again be left with medications that are created for really other populations. I'm hopeful that we will be overwhelmed with folk.
I'm in the field of human genetics. I would describe myself as a computational women's health geneticist. It started when I was actually in 8th grade. That was when I first started learning about genetics. I started reflecting back to my conversations with my family and how they're like, oh, well, you get this from your mom, you get this from your dad, this runs in our family. One of the things that was kind of always in conversation was hypertension or high blood pressure. I'm like, oh yeah, this is something that's normal. I was like, that doesn't sound right. And so when I started researching a bit more, I was like, oh, this actually disproportionately affects certain groups more than others. So that's kind of what started my journey into Alpus Pleuris research.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Oprah Winfrey Theater at the National Museum of African American History and Culture and the All of Us Research Program's Division of Engagement and Outreach Bridging Faith to the Future of Genomic Research event. Today's presentation is in collaboration with the Faith-Based Genetic Research Institute and the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Today's presentation will be live streamed. We ask that you silence your phones and minimize your side conversations. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of each panel presentation. We ask that you write those questions down and submit them to an usher to be addressed. To capture your feedback about today's event, we encourage you to complete a brief survey by scanning the QR code that will be presented at the end of the program. We also want to remind you to visit the All of Us Journey, which will be happening at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Annual Legislative Conference this week on September 11th, 12th, and 13th. To learn more, scan the QR code or visit joinallofus.org/tour. Now, please welcome to the stage Leslie Walker from the National Museum of African American History and Culture and Dr. Josh Denny, Chief Executive Officer with the All of Us Research Program.
Good morning. I'm Leslie Walker, Program Production Supervisor here at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm delighted to be collaborating with our partners at NIH's All of Us program to present a series of conversations that discuss the intersection of race, medicine, and faith. And our collaborators today have assembled a wonderful list of scholars who should be recognized for not only their biomedical research, but also helping us underscore how some research has not been so kind to the Black body. But now with these researchers and others like them at the helm, we are poised for medical advancements that are both ethical and culturally responsive to many experiences. As stated before, we intend for this conversation to be very participatory, and those of you that wish to ask a question, please do so on your note cards, and those that are watching from home, please submit your question in the chat. Lastly, as we end our conversation today, please be sure to visit our third floor and our community galleries, where you'll see on display William Montague Cobb, who is a pioneer in biomedical research and who helped upend some of those early racist notions of Black bodies, Black anatomy, and Black physiology. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the program.
Thank you, Leslie. It is a joy to be here today. My name is Josh Denny. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of All of Us Research Program, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. I got into medicine hearing the story of my grandparents who grew up and lost 4 children about 1 year of age to a genetic disease called cystic fibrosis. At the time, there was no understanding really of how to treat the disease, how to even diagnose it well. And since the gene was discovered in 1989, consistent progress was made in that condition, such that in 2019, my grandmother, who is still alive, witnessed the release of a triple drug therapy that is almost curative of this condition. Babies born now, with 90% or plus of those who are born now with this condition, have specific targeted therapies that can dramatically change and extend lifespan of these individuals, almost as if they don't have cystic fibrosis. And I know with passion the stories I heard from my grandparents, my dad, with some of these children going to the hospital for the last time, the deep desire to have known a way to treat conditions. I became a doctor in part because of that and wanting to help populations. And one of the things I saw with my population, taking care of a lot of under-resourced areas of Nashville, was there's so much we don't understand, and our knowledge is heterogeneous. There's so many places, especially in underrepresented populations of biomedical research, those of minoritized racial or ethnic populations, those who live in rural populations, as my grandmother was on a farm for a number of years. There's so many places where we just don't know enough, and we needed to do something to change this. That's why when this program came out, it just seemed so obvious to me as a passion and an ethical and scientific imperative that we try to close that gap and recruit a population that reflects the diversity that we know we have so richly in this country and changes some of the paradigms that we grew up with. So I'm so enthusiastic also about this panel because faith is a big part of my life. And it's part of why I felt called to be here and be part of this mission to try to change some of the ethical past and the scientific discrepancies and the narratives that we have not told well and try to close some of those gaps. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled that you all have made time to join this and be part of this discussion. I'm looking forward to hearing our wonderful speakers. Thank you.
We will now start our discussion on genomic research with our first moderator, Dr. Chasmin Jackson. Dr. Jackson currently serves as the first Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the American Society of Human Genetics. In this role, Dr. Jackson provides leadership in shaping programs, initiatives, and policies to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion at the forefront of human genetics and genomic research, health, and society. Dr. Jackson is a two-time graduate of historically Black colleges and universities, Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi, and Howard University, where she earned a doctorate of philosophy in medical microbiology. She has received several honors and has maintained her role as a health advocate across the spectrum of public services that impact her community. Through her career, Dr. Jackson has displayed a commitment to utilizing her scientific acumen and leadership skills to improve health and reduce the burden of disease, especially among vulnerable and marginalized groups. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Chasmin Jackson as our moderator.
Good day, everyone. I am so thrilled to be participating in today's conversation. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. And I'm even more excited because I get to guide a conversation between two dynamic speakers. So let me introduce them. Joining us is Dr. Kareem Watson. Dr. Watson is the Chief Engagement Officer of the National Institutes of Health All of Us Research Program. Dr. Watson leads the All of Us Research Program efforts to foster relationship with participants, communities, researchers, and providers across the United States to help build one of the largest, most diverse health databases of its kind to study health and illness. Prior to joining NIH, Dr. Watson spent over 15 years as a community-engaged research scientist with research funding from NIH addressing cancer prevention and control. Welcome, Dr. Watson. Next, I'd like to introduce a dear colleague and friend, and actually my former professor, Dr. Tashaka Cunningham. Dr. Tashaka Cunningham is a graduate of Princeton University. He received his PhD in molecular biology from Rockefeller University and completed his doctoral training at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, France, and at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. He previously worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs, overseeing a federally funded national research program on aging and neurodegenerative disease. While at the VA, Dr. Cunningham co-founded and serves as the executive director of the Faith-Based Genetic Research Institute, a community-based nonprofit organization dedicated to improving people's lives through the power of genomics and precision medicine. Advocating for diversity and representation in the field of genomics, Dr. Cunningham works to ensure STEM equity reaches underserved and minoritized communities across the DC area. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Cunningham. Now, before I pass them the mic, I must acknowledge and thank them for this brainchild of a shared vision of today's event. So please join me in just acknowledging the importance and the brevity of this event. It's sure to be an authentic and meaningful discussion to highlight the importance of gaining understanding of African ancestry and the significance and need for diverse and inclusive participation in genomics research and precision medicine, as well as the premier role that the NIH's All of Us research program is doing in these efforts. So I'd like to start with you, Dr. Cunningham. Please take the stage.
Thank you, Jasmine. As you can tell, I'm an excellent professor. These are the students we produce at our HBCUs. Jasmine's a double HBCU graduate of Tougaloo College and Howard University, where I was able to be one of her instructors. Praise the Lord, everyone. Can I just hear a praise the Lord? Deacon Dr. Cunningham has to get that out because I'm very excited to be here. This has been a long time in the making, and I'm happy to speak to you all today about our topic of bridging faith to the future of genomic research. I am going to talk to you about what is genomics and why should we care about it, okay? I myself am a scientist, a PhD molecular biologist by training, so that means I study all things molecular, including DNA and all the molecules in our body. But I know for the average person, this can be a bit of a mystery. What is it and what does it mean? So I wanted to just have a brief conversation about what is genomics and why is it important to us. And it starts with DNA. We've all heard that name, DNA. It stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. But what is it really? There was a very popular song back in the 90s, and I'm dating myself in hip hop. It's called All About the Benjamins, Baby. It's all about the DNA, baby. It's the molecule that makes us us. And what it is actually a molecule. It's a set of molecules, adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine, and these are nucleic acids that in collection make up the genetic information that make us unique as individuals. Now, some just basic number facts for us. Depending on who you ask, there are about 28 to 36 trillion cells in each of our bodies. So your body contains 28 to 36 trillion cells, depending on your size and your gender. That's the range. Remember that number, okay? Within each one of those cells is over 3 billion of these A, T, C, and G molecules, this unique code of DNA, a single letter code of A, T, C's, and G's that make you you in each one of your cells. So just to put that in perspective, the universe, our known universe, has about 200 billion trillion stars, okay? That number, billion trillion, is also known as a sextrillion, okay? If you do the math that I just gave you, around 30 trillion times 3 billion, that's almost 100 billion trillion. So we're almost the number of stars in the universe is the amount of DNA in your body. Now, if that doesn't come from above, I don't know what does. Can I get an amen? All right, so it's all about the DNA. Now, what's amazing about our DNA is that we are all descended from the same human ancestor that came out of Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is the origin of all mankind. So when you think about Adam and Eve, they came out of central sub-Saharan Africa over 130,000 years ago and radiated across the globe to make all of the populations that we see today. So we're all technically second, third, fifth, 150,000 cousins. Okay? We're all related genetically, and that is the magic of DNA. It's that molecule. You often hear it called the God molecule because it makes us us, and it's in all living beings. And so there's a tremendous amount of connectivity between all of us because we share the same common human ancestor. So just some facts about DNA, which are tremendous, is that because we come from the same common ancestor, we share a lot in common genetically. In fact, according to the NIH, all of the human genome sequences, the sequences of our DNA, are about 99.9% identical. Can you believe that? 99.9%. We're the same species. That's why we can interbreed. That's why we can make large communities. And that 0.1% is what we experience as the genetic diversity that we witness in what we call our phenotypic diversity, what makes us look different. But under the hood, we're all very similar. But that 0.1% is important to understand because it can determine things about us, like what is our susceptibility to disease, what is our likelihood to pass on disease to our children and other descendants. So it's really important for us to understand as much as we can about human genomes. And that's what the NIH has been doing. They invested first in the Human Genome Project, and almost 25 years ago, made the first draft of the human genome known to man, which is, let's give the NIH a round of applause for that, please. Because that Human Genome Project helped us get started to be able to get into the NIH All of Us project, which was started as the Precision Medicine Initiative by President Obama, right? To get at how genetics impact our predisposition for diseases and how we can advance to a new generation of medicine called precision medicine. But the unfortunate fact of the way that genomic research has been done is that very small percentage of the genomes that have been studied have been from people of color, people of African descent or other descent. Mostly, I'd say over 90% of the genomes that have been studied have been of people of European ancestry. But people of European ancestry are only about 15 to 20% of the global population. So in the scientific community, we have a lot of work to do. And it's gonna require engagement with our communities, particularly African-American communities and African communities that have not been a part of the research. We need to be included so we can know what's in our DNA, okay? And this is gonna help us make this paradigm shift. This is what we're all trying to go from. Right now, we're still making the shift from one-size-fits-all medicine. That is, I give you a pill regardless of knowing anything about you. I'm gonna give you a pill at a certain dose and hope it works for you. But we all know that doesn't always happen, right? You get a pill, this person has a good response, this person may have a bad response, this person may have an intermediate response. With knowing things like your genetics, your genomics, we can now understand what are the DNA mutations you have that make you process this medicine, respond to this medicine optimally. And that's the future of medicine. And now this is starting to become standard of care for certain conditions like cancer. If you get a cancer diagnosis, they're gonna sequence your tumor, look at the DNA mutations and say what chemotherapy is the best match for you. Now for our community, we need to know, when I say the Black and brown community, we need to know what other mutations that are specific in our community that we need to look out for and make treatments based on. And that will help us determine how we respond to treatments. This is important, it's real world stuff. I'm presenting some data from one of my colleagues who's one of our scientific advisors of FBGRI, Dr. Louiselle Rick-Santi, who's at the University of Florida, but was at Howard University before. She's looking at BRCA1 or BRCA1 mutations in breast cancer in African-American women. Now there are tests on the market for BRCA1 mutations. Most of those tests were developed with mostly Caucasian DNA data sets. And as a result, some of the analysis that Dr. Rick-Santi's group did, that those tests are accurate only about 9% of the time for African-American women, okay? That means 81% of the time they're gonna either be inaccurate or get it wrong. And what that means is there's a whole set, about 28% of those mutations that she found in African-American women that she looked at that hadn't even been reported yet, enough that you can make a whole new test just for African-American women for BRCA1. This is why we need to be present. Because if African-American DNA wasn't studied here, we wouldn't even know that. And if we don't know more about our DNA, there's gonna be X number of other conditions that we get the short end of the stick for. And we don't wanna see that happen. So we really need to come out and participate, know more about African-American and African DNA to help us have better health outcomes and prevent this kind of activity from happening, okay? I'll stop my remarks right there, and I'm going to introduce my colleague, Dr. Kareem Watson, who's going to tell you more about the NIH All of Us efforts in this regard.
Thank you, Dr. Cunningham. I am really blessed and fortunate to be surrounded by some really smart people, for Dr. Jackson and Dr. Cunningham. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today about what is the All of Us Research Program. You keep hearing about this program, the All of Us Research Program, and some of you are probably saying, what is it and what is it about? I like to say that our mission is in our name, all of us. When you think about populations who've been historically underrepresented in biomedical research, we think about those populations who carry the greatest burden of disease. And it's very personal for me. When I think about precision medicine, I think about my own family history, and I think that medicine has not always been precise for my family. Medicine wasn't precise when I'm a cancer disparities researcher, and I remember working in a community health center when this new groundbreaking study came out that was called the National Lung Screening Trial. It was funded by the National Cancer Institute. Over 56,000 participants in that study. Those of us that did cancer disparities research, we were excited because what this study showed was a 20% reduction in lung cancer mortality. That meant deaths, 20% people less would die from lung cancer from this groundbreaking study. But I'm trained as an implementation scientist, so what that means is that I go out there and I see what's happening, I see what new advances are coming down the pipeline, what new scientific breakthroughs happen, and it was my job to then implement those scientific breakthroughs in the community, to implement those scientific breakthroughs in the community that carry the greatest burden of disease. So imagine the day when, this true story, when I came back to our community clinic on the south side of Chicago, and I tried to implement these new lung cancer screening guidelines into our community clinic. When we went to implement those lung cancer screening guidelines in that community clinic, the providers had a blank stare on their face, and they began to look at me, and they said, Kareem, where did this data come from? And as a scientist, I was really proud. I was able to say, this study was a randomized, double-blind, controlled study. You know, I gave my scientific spiel, and they were still looking at me like I was absolutely crazy. And they said, our patients don't smoke like this. Our patients they won't meet this criteria. So these new groundbreaking guidelines for lung cancer screening would not benefit the patient population I got up every day to serve, and that several of those clinicians that I work with got up every day to serve. And I so I did a deeper dive to the data, and of those 56,000 participants, only 4.4% were African Americans. 4.4%. However, African Americans make up the greatest burden of those impacted by death and disparity due to lung cancer, but we were only 4.4% of us in the study. And only 9.8% of the participants in the overall study were from underrepresented racial and minoritized groups. So we set out on the south side of Chicago to redo that study and to think about how can we think about this differently. And what we found was that through diversity, through inclusion, intentional community engagement, intentional efforts, we were able to identify that those screening parameters weren't wide enough for certain populations, and that we would miss certain cancers if we only went by that study that had that narrow parameter. That meant that science would not benefit a whole portion of the population because it was not conclusive enough. And so that was a stark reminder to me when I was completing my postdoc with Dr. Robert Wynn, that we had to be intentional with community engagement. And so I've been proud to be a part of the All of Us research program since its inception. One of the reasons why we're here today is because of what we heard back in 2017 and 2018. Even our CEO and I, Dr. Denny, we had the opportunity of going around the country. He was at Vanderbilt at the time, and we heard from the community members about what was important to them. And one of the things we heard was that when you get findings from this NIH groundbreaking study, you can't disseminate those findings in the same way that you all always disseminate those findings. You can't publish these findings in the paper and expect that community members are going to read your publications. You can't have these conversations in your academic halls and expect that community members are going to know what those outcomes were from those studies. So us being here today is actually in direct response to what we heard from the community, that we have to bring the results from the research back to the community and have conversations about what we found. So a lot of that data that Dr. Cunningham talked to you about, lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in clinical trials, I am proud to say that is not the case for all of us. All of us is one of the nation's largest and most diverse research programs in the country. We are setting out, unlike some research that I used to do where I was trying to find out if, I hope that's not a fire alarm. Okay, it's not good. See, this is why you have to be able to pivot and be able to respond. So I thank God that I grew up in the black church so that you know how to pivot and respond to things and nothing throws you off. So as I was saying, one of the things that we, in some research, you're trying to see if drug A is different than drug B. But in all of us, we're not saying not to do that, because some studies have what's called inclusion and exclusion criteria to them. Even the design of some research, you all, keep certain populations out of them because we don't meet those inclusion and exclusion criteria. All of us was intentionally designed to collect data from 1 million or more people over a period of time. We say about 10 years, but our goal is to collect this data for more than 10 years, to think about and then make that data readily available. Another thing that often doesn't happen in research is that sometimes research will only collect biological samples. It'll only want to know about the DNA. It'll only want to know about your biology, what's under your skin. But it won't ask those questions about what's happening on top of your skin. It won't ask those questions about what's happening because of the color of your skin. And in all of us, we set out to do a more inclusive type of research where we have survey data, electronic health record data, because your electronic health record data is so important. I just had my annual physical, and I was not happy to see that COVID weight has not shifted back to that pre-COVID weight. But it was important for my doctor to have that. I saw a little graph going up, and I was like, why is this graph going up? And he said, that's your weight. And I said, so, okay, so we have to set out to do something different, but I wouldn't have access to that if I didn't have the electronic health record. So in all of us, we are making sure that we combine samples from participants, biological samples, survey sample, and EHR data to be able to tell a better story. This is the example of what Dr. Cunningham talked about earlier. Other genomic studies, look at this pie chart on the right. These are the studies on the right with the global genome-wide association studies. These are the studies that typically produce a lot of the innovative research that you see. That is from participants that do not necessarily reflect the diversity of the US. But if you shift to the right, that pie graph over there, that's the All of Us research program. We truly reflect the diversity of the US, with over 16.6% of our participants self-identifying as African American, 16.2% self-identifying Hispanic or Latino, 3.2% Asian American, and even we were one of the first programs to collect data on Middle East and Northern African populations and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. And this fall, we're actually going to release data talking about the importance of how we engage and include American Indian and Alaska Native populations in that. But the reason why you don't see that data shown today is because in order to disseminate that data, you have to do it in a way where you align with tribal partners and in a sensitive way. And lastly, before I end, I'll talk about something that's also very important to me. Because of the size and diversity of the All of Us research program, we are able to understand chronic conditions and the conditions that affect African Americans at disproportionate rates. I told you that this is very personal for me, and it is. In May of 2021, while the rest of the country is still going through chronic conditions after the COVID-19, in March of 2020, we unfortunately buried my mother from complications of lung cancer. Even as a cancer disparities researcher, my mother was never a smoker, never had any environmental exposure, so we think. So what was happening? I need more research to understand why more women of color are getting lung cancer who don't have risk factors for lung cancer. In May of 2021, I lost my oldest brother from complications of chronic kidney disease and renal dialysis because he was a chronic kidney disease patient, but he also had late-stage colorectal cancer. I remember having a conversation where I wanted his oncologist and his nephrologist, his cancer doctor and his kidney doctor to talk. But what I'm really concerned about is our family history, to make sure that my children, our children's children are better able to understand, are there going to be one day, are we going to have an environment, a healthcare system where we can predict if you have certain mutations, certain genes that may put you at elevated risk for chronic kidney disease, and that your doctor can have a conversation with you about how your diet, your lifestyle, and even your medications can inform what you may or may not be at risk for. That's the future of healthcare, but we won't get to that future unless we ensure that research is truly reflective of those populations that have been historically underrepresented. So I'm thankful to be a part of this program today. I look forward to our discussion. I'm going to turn the floor back over to Dr. Jackson.
So of course I have a few questions, but I wanted to prep you so that if you have questions for our panel that you received, for those in the theater, received a card where you can write down your questions. We'll have someone pick that up from you. And for those of you who are online, please submit those as well so that we can offer those questions to our panel. So to begin, well, this is for either or both. Can you share what role trust and trustworthiness plays in engaging communities in genomics research?
Yeah, I think it's a central role. Trust is the beginning of building a relationship. And I think what happens all too frequently, unfortunately, in the medical community is that trust bridge, that foundation of trust is not established with the patients before asking them to do X, Y, or Z. It's just, hey, we're doing this research study, give me your samples. I think we need a new paradigm. And that's part of what we're trying to do with FPGRI and the community dialogues we're having to educate people and to be honest brokers of information about the type of work that's going on and to build those bridges of trust and then ask for participation. So I think it's vital because one of the things, again, as I've witnessed my lived experience as an African-American male in my own family, is there's a healthy distrust of the medical establishment from that some of that was earned from sins of the past. But what I'm hopeful about as someone who's a medical professional researcher myself is that we overcome that so we don't miss out. We don't let that distrust that was due to the sins of the past disrupt our future. So I think trust is vitally important, and I'm happy that we're seeing efforts by NIH, all of us, and other programs to do community outreach to build that kind of trust.
And Dr. Jackson, I'm happy that you asked the term about trust and trustworthiness. When I think about trustworthiness, I think trust is important, but that puts the onus sometimes on this person trusting the system. And as Dr. Cunningham said, there's a certain healthy skepticism that communities of color have, and that healthy skepticism is needed. It actually keeps us safe sometimes to be skeptic of some things. And so what's really important is for systems to become more trustworthy. And that's what all of us is setting out to do. I've been fortunate enough with our team to lead some conversations that we're having in Macon County. If you know anything about Macon County, Tuskegee, Alabama is the home of the United States Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. The reason I say the full name is because, A, the community asked us not to call it the Tuskegee experiment anymore, because they said they didn't ask for that study, so don't call it by the name of the city. They didn't ask for that. And by calling it the full name, you tell the history of that study, and you tell why trustworthiness is so important. So it was really important for us to build trust. It took us about 4 years or more in building a trusted relationship with partners at Tuskegee University, with the community members in Macon County, seeing researchers from Tuskegee University, seeing researchers from Macon County. That took almost 4 years for that trusted relationship, for us to rebuild our trustworthiness as a government partner to them. So this concept of trustworthiness is so important, and that's why bridging the conversation to faith is also important. Within the All of Us research program, one of the surveys I talked about is the Social Determinants of Health survey, because we have about 27 questions that our participants complete. And one of those questions that we ask our participants is, what does the role of spirituality and faith play in how you make your health decisions? And if we don't train our healthcare providers about the importance that their patients or their participants may want to take into account their faith and how they make decisions about their healthcare, that does not make us trustworthy.
To follow on, how do you communicate this value of participating in research? And in particular, what have you heard when you've communicated with faith communities? Are there any challenges that you've received in communicating the value of genomics research or precision medicine?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of challenges, and I love to quote the book of Hosea. It's my favorite scripture. Every time we do events in the church, one of my favorite scriptures is, and you all may know it, let me see if you do, my people perish for lack of knowledge, right? And I feel like this knowledge that we're talking about of genetics and health is knowledge that our community, particularly the Black community, can no longer afford to lack. We have to understand our genetics. I think, though, that those two things go hand in hand, building trust and then delivering information to people in a way that they can absorb it. I'm a molecular biologist. I've trained for over 25 years to understand all of this high science, okay? But the average person hasn't. So my job now becomes, how do I break it down so that my mom, my cousins, and everybody in my church family can understand it? And that's what we try to do at FBGRI. So what I found is when we do that, people are very receptive. They want it. Once you can kind of tell people what the risks are and the benefits are in language that they can understand, then they line up and want to participate. But what I think happens too often in some of these studies is folks are just like, hey, we got a research study, come and give me your sample. I think we're going to have a different dialogue with the community, and I think we can have a different dialogue, particularly with faith communities, because that's where a lot of minority communities get their trusted information. And so as we get the right information to the faith communities, I think that trust building is going to happen more naturally.
And I think that some of the messages that I've heard in the faith community, when we talk about the faith community, I want to be clear that we're talking about the broad and inclusive faith community across multiple religions, multiple beliefs. When we're thinking about our temples, our churches, and our mosques, and other places, we think about the faith conversation. And one of the things that I've heard, I used to do some work with what was called health ministers or health leaders, similar to community health workers. And they wanted things broken down in layperson's term. They wanted us not to use that big scientific language that we often use, but talk about what is the importance. So for example, we saw this during the pandemic. There were many scientists that were talking about the importance of getting vaccinated and getting tested for COVID-19. But where we saw a lot of that movement happen was when our churches and our mosques and our temples started doing testing in those parking lots. When we heard from faith leaders from their pulpits or from their podiums saying that this is important for us to be a part of this and to ask questions about the advances of science. Even there's an NIH study called the Jackson Heart Study that's looking at cardiovascular disease in Jackson, Mississippi. That study actually looked at participants who said that they had a higher spirituality belief or that they had spiritual practices. That study began to show that those participants in that Jackson Heart Study who noted that they have a strong spiritual support system actually had better cardiovascular disease outcomes.
I don't know about you guys, but I am getting really overwhelmed with this clarity of where some of the barriers are, but then what all of us and other programs are doing to overcome them. What do you say to people who have fears and concerns about their data being safe and protected? And how are these programs avoiding misuse and abuse?
I'm going to let Dr. Watson speak to specifically the NIH, but I'm going to say just in general, I think it's healthy to have a fear of something you don't understand at the beginning. But then through education and knowledge, you mitigate that fear and decide whether or not you really need to have it. I think with genetics and health, that's one of those sort of boogeyman that's out there because we don't fully understand it. It's like what I hear from people in the community a lot is, what are they going to do with my information? How are they going to use it to help me? So there's a mysterious they out there, okay, a nefarious force that is presumably going to take this data and do something bad to you with it. The truth of it is, it's kind of hard to do that. And I say that as a genetic scientist. If I sequenced everyone in this room, which I can do in my lab, if I took a saliva sample, I could take it on my sequencer in my lab, run your ATCs and Gs, tell you what your sequence is. But if I don't know anything really else about you, and don't have a whole ton of information, I can't use it to hurt you. I just know your sequence. There's very few things where I can actually weaponize that against you, right? So I think that's a little bit of outsized fear. Now, I say all that to say also, you should always want to protect your health data. So I wouldn't want everybody to just have my data out there. There was a data breach by one of the major testing companies out there that's a problem. So we shouldn't have that. I think some level of fear and concern for your data is always clear, but we need to balance the fears that we have with the medical realities that we want to take place and take part of in the future so that we don't find ourselves in the position where we're so afraid that we miss out on being able to benefit from the future advances.
I'll start from the participant lens because yes, I'm a scientist, yes, but I'm also Kareem, the participant in the program. And I'll be honest with you, one of the things that made me most comfortable was our informed consent process. So when some of you all may be interested, you go to joinallofus.org or scan that QR code to find out how you can learn more about all of us. If you do that, you'll see that the first piece that you get engaged with is part of the consent process. And our consent process is not short. I will warn you, it's not short. And that's intentional. Because we don't want the consent process to be short. We want to talk, we want to have a conversation with you about what it means to be included in our study. And the other thing that was important when I joined is that I wanted my data included. I'm a cancer disparities researcher, right? And so I talk about when the prostate health index or prostate specific antigen, PSA, when that study was first done, it was not done on the majority of African American men. It was actually done on data in Europe. So our PSA guidelines were developed on men that don't look like the population that carry the greatest burden. So I would be hypocritical if I weren't a part of the research. So I'm a participant. And as Kareem Watson, you won't see my name in the study. The first thing that we have to do is de-identify the data. And I encourage all people before you join any clinical trial to really understand the consent process and to ask those questions. Who will have access to my data? What will happen with my data? How will it be de-identified? It was easier for me, because I know research, to join and give my blood sample and to complete the surveys, but I was still a little skittish about giving my electronic health record. I'll be honest, because I worked at the hospital where the study was going on, and I was like, I don't know if I want my research assistant. They had to remind me, they said, Kareem, that's not how it works. No one here will have access to your electronic health record information. That information will be de-identified and uploaded in a way that's totally not gonna allow anyone here to see that. So those are questions that even I, as a scientist, had to ask. And then I wanted to know, what is the program doing to keep my data safe on a regular basis? And we do things like hackathons, even where we have some of the best and brightest try to break into our data and to see how they can get access to that data. So I'm excited that there's some really smart computer scientists, some people that understand data safety and protection way better than I do, making sure that my data is safe and protected, because my data had to be included.
I'm also a participant, proudly. And I have to tell you, again, the sign-up process is a bit onerous, but I love the data that I'm getting back from it. I feel like the All of Us program, for example, the African ancestry component, when I did another testing service, I'm not going to say what it was, said I was only 55% African. But All of Us was more accurate, so I'm 60% African, right? I thought I was at least 75 because I got 3 African names. Tashaka Jawanta Changa Cunningham, that's the slave name. But I'm just going to tell you, having that gave me a great deal of comfort, right? Not only because I felt like they got the ancestry algorithm better, plus I also learned things about me that, genetically, I'm feeling pretty good because I don't have too many mutations out there, right, that are bad for me. So I have one that if I have to take an antidepressant, they got to give me a higher dose. But I'm glad I know that, because if I ever go on an antidepressant and need to get my dose adjusted, I can go in with that information to my doctor and be ready to go and get the right level of treatment. So I'm a proud participant in this program, and I do think they do a great job of protecting the data, knock on wood, right? Let's make nothing happen there. But I think the information that the researchers are going to be able to gain from this data set far outweighs any risk that we might fear from a data breach, in my perspective.
I learned about my reaction to blood thinners. So I got my data back, and it told me that if I ever, God forbid, were to have any event where I would need certain blood thinners, I would have to talk to my doctors about, do I have the right dose of that blood thinner? Because my body reacts differently to certain blood thinners.
We did receive a question from the audience. In the same sense of our nation having a national defense strategy, is there a national health strategy that reaches out to all of us, or at least incorporates in the initiatives you happen to champion?
We're one of them. We are one of those national health strategies. All of Us is one of the most innovative research programs that existed. One of the things I was saying before was that some research programs are looking to test drug A versus drug B, or device A and B. We're looking to collect data from 1 million or more people and then make that data readily available to researchers. And when we achieve our mission of enrolling over 1 million or more people across the life course, that will include all people from birth to end of life. When we achieve that mission and make that data readily available, we will be able to answer research questions and spark research questions that currently cannot be sparked because of the current lack of diversity in data. So I would say we are one of those solutions. And there's other NIH programs going on. Through the Common Fund, they're doing some amazing things. They're doing some amazing things at NHLBI, looking at community engagement and implementation science. So I would encourage our listeners, both in the room and online, to go to the NIH and look at all the ways that the NIH is doing community engaged research differently.
Yeah, this is our tax dollars at work. And as citizens, we should be very proud of our National Institutes of Health and support and engage in these studies because our tax dollars are paying for it. So we should participate so that we can benefit. I trained many years ago as a postdoc fellow at the NIH. And I can tell you it's a preeminent research organization. And they're doing a lot of population health type of studies that are meant to move our society forward health-wise. So I definitely agree with what Dr. Watson said for us to look at the information on there and the websites and participate.
So another question from our audience: how might you all encourage younger people to consider participating in studies when it comes to age?
Well, again, younger people can't consent to participate in these kinds of research studies, but hopefully, I'm very passionate about engaging youth in STEM. I actually participate in a number of projects here in the DC area, Future Kings STEM training, as well as Future Queens of STEM training, where we train young men and young women ages 6th grade and up in the molecular sciences. So they actually learn how to sequence. And we've had a group of young ladies in our Future Queens cohort that was learning how to sequence DNA related to genes for human hair texture. So they were looking at different genes related to hair texture. And then we recently had a program with our young boys, Future Kings, that was looking at curing a rare disease that one of the young men had. So we had a rare genetic mutation that the boys were able to clone the gene for it and change the level of that gene expression in cells. So they're learning some advanced techniques that are going to keep them in the STEM fields. This is what's going to keep us as Americans competitive in the global marketplace as we maintain our dominance in innovation in this field. And so we should be very thankful of the investments that the NIH and other federal agencies are making in this, and I hope to see that continue.
Representation matters. We all know that. It's not just a cliche to say if you can see it, you can truly believe it. But it's true. I remember when I was a graduate student or a postdoc, and I heard that there was this new African-American geneticist coming to Chicago, Dr. Rick Kittles, and they did a presentation for him at DuSable Museum of African-American History. I went to that concert like I was going to a Jay-Z concert or a Clark Sisters concert, because I grew up in the church, so it was both Jay-Z and the Clark Sisters, right? But I went to see Dr. Kittles like he was a rock star to me, because he was. It was a black man doing genetics, scientist in a way, and just seeing it, I still remember it to this day. But even the importance of us starting even before graduate school, I was in a program called the New Lights, the National Urban League Incentives to Excel and Succeed, that exposed me to STEM careers when I was in junior high and in 6th grade. So I know the importance of exposing our youth to careers in STEM and what it can do. I know we're running out of time, so we got a chance about one more question? 2 more?
All of these are very good questions. We talked a lot about settings, and of course the content of this conversation is focused on faith communities, but we have a question from the audience that says, well, what about, black men who may not be in churches? Are there efforts to recruit and support them who, for example, maybe in barbershops?
Yeah, you can read one of my publications on African-American men in barbershops. But no, I'm joking, but seriously, just next Saturday, I'll be at Cut It Out Kurt's shop on the south side of Chicago talking about the importance. He's celebrating his 25th anniversary. But why is that barbershop so important? Because he's closed on Mondays, but he's open on Tuesdays. Kurt is there. Kurt reaches more black men every week than I could ever think about reaching. So we engage Kurt and other African-American barbers in the city of Chicago as citizen scientists. We actually trained and engaged them on the importance of talking to their clients about certain cancer screening, colorectal cancer screening, prostate cancer screening, tobacco cessation, and in the importance of mental health as well. So I believe in reaching people wherever they are. Faith community. We work with, Shaka and I are both part of fraternities. He's a part of another one. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. But we both, wherever we go, we're talking, we meet men and we meet the community where they are.
And that's so important. Again, for many of our communities, particularly African-American communities, historically the church is such a foundation for disseminating information into the community. It's not lost on me that the entire civil rights movement started in the church, right? And the churches were the safe spaces where our ancestors met and helped us make progress. So I think churches extend to barbershops, extend into the community, and we need to reach the community everywhere that we are.
I'm going to ask just one quick question, and I'll use this as an opportunity for you all to share your final thoughts. If we were doing shout-outs and we were identifying things that really do work in partnering with communities, what would you say is the top attributes that have to be on that list that's working well in partnering with communities for research?
First thing that comes to my mind is nothing about us without us. It's really FUBU, for us, by us. When I think about what it meant for me when I was in the 6th grade to see that scientist, when I think about, I still to this day think about what it meant for me to see Dr. Kittles, diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that has to be intentional about that. So if I had to give a shout out, I would give a shout out to the All of Us program too for being intentional. My role as the Chief Engagement Officer, this was a groundbreaking role for the NIH to actually have a Chief Engagement Officer, for someone's job to be to intentionally think about how do I equitably engage those populations who've been historically underrepresented.
And I think it's not lost on me that someone from the community, Dr. Watson is from our community, is African American. And so that gives me great comfort as a fellow African American citizen that I have representation in the program. I think what shout outs to me is the future. You mentioned the youth. I'm going to actually shout out one of my young future King students. Gideon, can you please stand up for us? Let's give Gideon a round of applause. Gideon was one of those young men I was telling you about in our Future Kings program about 6 years ago, and actually 8 years ago now. Gideon has just recently graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University and is coming to work for one of my biotech companies. So That's our future, and that's what happens in our communities, and it can make us happen. And you mentioned the importance of identity. I know I sort of played the role of Dr. Kittles for you, for Gideon, and that's what we need to do more of. So I would love to see the NIH support more of that, more of the training of the next generation of underrepresented minority male and female scientists, as well as just more community dialogue, more events like this, more forums where we can talk to the community at large and demystify some of this incredible science that we're funding.
Everyone, please join me in giving a round of applause to these dynamic, outstanding speakers. And I'm greatly looking forward to our next conversation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think I can introduce myself. I'm Rosalind McAllister Brock. I am the Chief Global Equity Officer for APT Global, and I'm the Associate Minister of the historic Alfred Street Baptist Church. And I'm so pleased that all of you are here this afternoon for this very insightful and timely conversation. I want to thank the panelists for the discussion that has already taken place, but now we're going to go just a little bit deeper and have a more in-depth conversation about one's faith and the role of medical research. And so at this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Fatima Jackson to join us on stage to be a part of this panel conversation. But as she comes, let me share a little bit about her, as she is a woman of many great accomplishments. Dr. Jackson is currently Professor Emerita with the University of Maryland, College Park, as well as Professor Emerita with Howard University, and was awarded that distinguished honor based upon her service in academia. A brief snapshot of her accomplishments include having served at 5 academic institutions, appears in over 150 research publications, has received over $15 million in major external funding from both government and private institutions, and has received a number of academic and professional honors and awards, including being named Woman STEM Researcher of the Year from Howard University. We can give that a big round of applause. Dr. Jackson has vast experience in various research areas, including genetic variation and health disparities in peoples of African ancestry. Because of her depth of knowledge and inspiring work, it is no surprise that she has mentored and influenced more than 2,000 undergraduate students, 40 graduate students, and at least 7 doctoral students. We're so happy to have you join this panel, Dr. Jackson. Let's give her another big, big round of applause. So let's get started. Dr. Jackson, I'm going to begin with you. It's a fact that faith-based organizations serve some of the most vulnerable populations. They are so embedded in communities that you can easily find 3 or more places and houses of worship on every corner across the length and breadth of our nation. And because of their locale, their identity as a trusted and dependable voice, both in good times and bad times, these faith institutions speak to the local needs of our communities, both large and small. Despite such favorable characteristics and their importance to the African American culture, these institutions are sometimes overlooked, undervalued, and most often overexposed by research data collection, resulting in a growing gap in health equity. Now to the question. Dr. Watson, can you please share how the Division of Engagement and Outreach with All of Us has identified the importance of faith-based centers in a community in reaching your goals on awareness and knowledge mobilization, and what has been the system's response to your approach of such inclusion? Dr. Watson.
Can you hear me now? Great. Thank you for that question. As I was saying, I'm very fortunate to lead the Division of Engagement and Outreach in All of Us. And as scientists, we use this term a lot called evidence-based data. That means that there's been some research that has been done that says that what I'm doing and what I'm trying out is not just an idea, it's not just something I think works, but there's actually been studies to show that this works. And we know that community dissemination, talking about the results of research in public settings like this, that it works. That we know that each one of you are gonna go out and talk and have an idea and say, I heard about the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion in research. That's gonna leave an impact on me. So the next time that someone talks to me about a screening trial, about a vaccine study, about research in general, I'll have a seed planted that can say, make me say, write that idea. So one of the things we've done with our faith-based partners, we've actually formed a faith-based working group, where we actually partner with community-based organizations like faith-based, like FBGRI, Dr. Cunningham's group, and others, and even other denominations and other religion groups, partnering with them, because the importance of space and place and person matter. What do I mean by that? Space matters because where someone receives the information is important, because if you receive information in a setting where you already have a trusted relationship, you're more likely to act on that information. And person matters because who is your trusted messenger? Who's giving you that information, and what relationship do you have with that person? So it's so important for us to partner with communities of faith and researchers that know how to partner with communities of faith. And we're doing that through a series of community engaged, what we call return of value events that we've had all throughout the DMV.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Watson. And now to my fellow church member at Alfred Street, Dr. Cunningham. Given your role as a community engagement partner, can you share more about your organization's faith-based Genomics Research Institute and the impact that you've had in increasing the awareness of genetic research in faith-based institutions? And part two, have you received any pushback as you bring the science into sacred places? Dr. Cunningham.
Well, Minister Brock, it's so great to see you again, outside of church even. But for full disclosure, I'm a deacon at Alfred Street Baptist Church. And so Deacon Dr. Cunningham, I guess, right? and have been so for the past 13 years. My dear friend and shepherd, Pastor Howard John Wesley, who is such an incredible minister, pastor, and just purveyor of our faith. When people hear Pastor Wesley talk about something, they listen. And they listen not only intently to the word, but then they act. Remember Michelle Obama during the convention said, do something? They'll do something after Pastor Wesley says it. If Pastor Wesley says, you need to drink more orange juice, a good half of our church is going to be drinking more orange juice by next Sunday. So part of my mission as a deacon and a doctor in the church is to help Pastor Wesley learn how to talk about the stuff that we do with the most factual information that we can have. And that's what we do at FBGRI. So Pastor Wesley and his colleagues writ large in different faith communities across the country, learning how to dialogue and communicate with high research science where it meets the community. That's what we do at FBGRI. Now, one of our first events pre-COVID, we had an event in 2019, right before everything shut down, the pandemic shut everything down, at Alfred Street, in the old sanctuary, you know, the sanctuary where the original church was built on. And we had a packed house talking about the importance of genetics and health. This is before we got NIH, all of us, funding or support or anything. We were just having the dialogue. And one of the things I learned during that session is two things. One, the first was people, once they learned what it was, cared about it. They were like, hey, I know what this genetic stuff is, and this is how it can help me and my family. And then the second thing I learned is once they started caring about it, they really wanted to do it. I had people wanting to give me a saliva sample right there. But I only had 10, free test kits to give out from one of the, vendors that gave it to us. So I wish I had all of us funding at that moment, because we would have signed up 250 people that morning.
You have it now.
Okay, I got it. Right, we're good now. You guys learn
something.
We're about to do something. So a long way to answer your question, Minister Brock, the faith community is a great place for engagement. The pushback, you do get some pushback. Sometimes folks are distrustful. But what I've also found is when you break it down, you meet them where they are with their distrust and really try to understand why they have it and have an honest dialogue about it, you can often get past it. And then once folks start realizing, hey, this was sort of an unfound fear that I have, they get over it. And then they want to participate even more. So I love that there is pushback in our community. Our community should never just willingly accept just whatever comes out. But I also love the fact that we're an intelligent community, that when we learn the facts and how it's going to help us, we're going to sign up to participate.
I appreciate that so much. What research has to understand, what the political industry already knows, the power of the pulpit and the community and faith-based institutions. So thank you so much, Deacon Dr. Cunningham. Now, Dr. Jackson, I'm so excited to hear from you on this subject, and as you come and we trade places to talk about the role of faith, I'm interested in your perspective on the intersection of faith and resiliency, particularly for communities of color, given their encounters of systemic oppression. Can you share with us briefly your experiences of how communities are motivated by such resiliency? Why don't you welcome Dr. Jackson as she comes to the podium.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to have been invited here. I just recently retired from Howard University, and my husband said, "Are you still working?" And I said, "Yes, but this is not just work. This is love, because we need genetic and genomic knowledge." And so I'm very happy to be speaking to you about bridging faith and genomic research, and really community engagement is the heart of it. That's what all of us really brings, and we've been waiting for 30 years for this. We're begging NIH, please test us, evaluate us, and now we have the technology as well as the proper mindset within which to have a very successful and cohesive and inclusive assessment of African American diversity. So this has been something I've worked on my 42 years in academia, and I'm so grateful that I'm able to see this project at this point. And it's just, it opens up the door for so many positive developments in precision medicine and so forth. But I want to talk about community engagement, resilience and clinical research participation, Islam as a practicing Muslim, and research participation, and then the challenges that are needed as we advance health equity. Now, why is community engagement important? We've talked about building trust, and I think that my colleagues have done an excellent job talking about trust is on both sides. You know, it's on the side of the researchers, but in terms of our community as well. And some of you in the audience I was speaking to earlier today, this morning, and I said, you know, when we talk about slavery, for example, we say, when we were slaves. But none of us were slaves. But we have this longitudinal perspective that the crimes of the past are the burdens that we must bear. And yet, I think we're taking sometimes the wrong message from our past. Our past is a history of resilience. And where does that resilience come from? It's not from Islam or Christianity per se. It goes much back, deeper than that. It goes to our African spirituality. That's what when we call out in the midnight hour. You know what I'm talking about. When we make a way where there is no way. We were doing that before we understood who Jesus was, before we understood the tenets of Islam. We still understood that there was something greater than us and greater than those who oppressed us that we could call on and that we could use as a basis for empowerment. And that's what I see all of us actually being a vehicle for empowerment. Because if you know yourself, then you can act accordingly. You can take the right foods, you can take the right medications, you can engage with your body in a way that sustains life. Now, cultural preservation is another important part of community engagement. We need to be involved so that the All of Us program or any other program that comes down the pike is responsive to our needs, our unique needs. Okay? Of course, this increases our civic participation because if you have a good idea about yourself, you feel more engaged and more part of the society. Our health, our wellness is very much tied to understanding our genetics. It's not that genetics is the end-all and the be-all. That's not true. But it's a significant contribution to who we are as a people. And what I've found over the years of doing research on African Americans and African descended peoples is that we are a highly diverse people. We are an amalgamation of different African peoples. We're not solely from one tribe or another tribe, but from an amalgamation, a mixture of different African tribes from different parts of the continent. And the significance of that is that Africa is the homeland of humanity. So our species, Homo sapiens, as Dr. Cunningham pointed out, we've spent the longest period of time in Africa. So what does that mean? That means that our ancestors, I'm talking about way remote ancestors, have had the opportunity to accumulate mutations that are the basis for genetic variability. So it's that genetic variability that we want to capture. Now, most of our genetic variability as African Americans comes from Africa, from our African ancestors, with minor inputs from non-Africans. You know, you wouldn't get that from the literature. The literature makes you think that the biggest source of variation in African Americans was our European ancestors. But no, it's our African ancestors because the greatest variability is in Africa. So we have a portion of that variability in us. The anomaly is that not that many Africans actually were brought to North America. Only about 350,000, the majority of whom were men, and maybe 1/3 were females. Of those 1/3 that were females, let's say 120,000 African women, only about 100,000 to 75,000 actually reproduced. So here we are today in 2024, 40 million people, but with founding mothers of between 100,000 and 75,000. What does that mean? That means most of us are related to each other. We just don't know it. And genetics is so powerful. It provides the opportunity to reconnect us, to undo the garbage that our ancestors faced when families were separated, when children were torn from their mother's breast. The genetics can pull us back together. So not only can we find out if we have a susceptibility to APOL1 or any other genes that were advantageous in the African environment, but are sources of clinical disorder here, we also can use the genetics to identify our relatives, to put back together that which slavery and Jim Crow racism has torn apart. That's extremely powerful. I guess I'm going to borrow from you. Isn't that what God does? I mean, you know, people do bad to us, but we are able to fix what they have done and reconnect. And that reconnection is part of the importance of community engagement in, I call us legacy African Americans, because we didn't just arrive here last week. We didn't come off, just get off the boat from Lagos. No. We've been here. We went through the legacy of slavery, the legacy of Jim Crow racism, and that has altered patterns of gene expression. So one of the things that can be done with all of us, and I don't know if it's going to be done, but to look at some of the epigenomics, because certainly you have the information on environmental and dietary exposures. So again, a project like this has a way of opening up all kinds of possibilities that we never imagined, and to create true equity in the country that we have sacrificed so much for. These other topics that highlight the importance of community engagement, like leadership development, partnerships and collaborations, and celebrating success, are natural downstream ramifications of community engagement. Now, in terms of resilience, I said that our resilience comes from our African spirituality, which we have, I posit, infused in our Christianity, and we've certainly infused it in our Islam. And that's why we own it. And the organizations that we own should be the organizations that we link to for community engagement in this very important genetics project. Of course, we've talked about the historical patterns of clinical research participation, and what I want to point out is that for a long time in American history, African Americans were the sole participants in clinical research. I'm talking about unregulated experiments on surgery without anesthesia done on enslaved people. Who were the enslaved people? Our ancestors. These historical patterns are interesting to me because before there was ethics in medical research, we were the dominant research group for analysis. As soon as the ethics came in, then we get the short end of the stick. We're not engaged. We're somehow not willing to participate in clinical trials. We're not being asked. We're not being included. So all of us has the chance to turn all of that around. And I think that that's extremely important. We've had a history of cultural and linguistic barriers, but I want to get to the next slide, which is really talking about the things that we can do to overcome the disadvantages that we face. Of course, the roots, I said, are in our spirituality, but the benefits of our clinical research participation, how does this help us? Well, if you increase the diversity, then you get more generalizable, more applicable results, more results that are going to be relevant. And what my research is telling me is that because of the underlying genetic diversity in African Americans, you need a large sample size in order to capture all that diversity. The good thing is that we actually, at the end of the day, are all related to each other. So, okay. We want to improve our health outcomes, develop these targeted treatments, which are extremely important and have been discussed in the first section. We want to build trust because this is our country. You know, we have affinities to many other nations in Africa, but this is our country. And this is where we put down our roots. And we want to be empowered by increasing involvement and benefit to include other African Americans. We serve as a model for so many different populations around the world. So people are looking to see how are African Americans going to be included in this major initiative. Finally, in terms of the challenges to advancing health equity, we have of course, socioeconomic factors. If you go to the physician and you're not knowledgeable about your disorder, then you're at a disadvantage in terms of getting adequate treatment. And sometimes our challenge to health equity is that we don't have access to actual good quality health care. If the physicians are there, they're not interested, or if they're interested, they take shortcuts with us, or they generalize, or they're not informed about our inherent diversity. Of course, chronic stress and psychosocial factors, racism, discrimination, those can all influence the expression of genes. So it's not enough just to know your genetics, but you have to know the social context within which those genes express themselves. I mentioned to you epigenetics. I just want to point out that the actual discoverer of epigenetics was the Honorable Ernest Just. And Ernest Just was a cell biologist who, in the 1920s, said, it's not just the nucleus. There's something else going on in the cell. And so, you know, it reminds me that this black man was ahead of his time. He was a genius. He saw things that his fellow nuclear gene-centered researchers had not seen. But we are still benefiting from his insights. And it's a reminder that if we give ourselves permission to explore our natural talents, to be our whole selves, then we will succeed. We will have a presence in the 22nd century. Finally, these challenges include historical and structural factors, which again, you are familiar with, historical injustices and structural racism, but health behaviors. I've often imagined that if we knew the genetics, we could structure our lives so that from the very first baby food that we received, that it was appropriate for our genomes. Imagine that. That could be a whole industry. Maybe there's some entrepreneurs out there that would like to market baby food for particular genomes. In any event, thank you all very much. I'm getting the signal to move on, and thank you.
Truly, Dr. Jackson has taken us to class this afternoon. We want to, friends, join me in thanking Dr. Watson, Dr. Cunningham, and Dr. Jackson for their very thoughtful leadership this afternoon. Let's give them a big round of applause. And friends, I'm the immediate past chairman of the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization, the NAACP. I served as chairman of that august body. And as I listened today about the role of how research and what we need to do, I share with you that we are our best advocates. We are the ones we've been waiting for. And I'm reminded of a passage of scripture in Isaiah 58:12 that says, "Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up age-old foundations. You will be called repairers of broken walls, restorers of streets and dwellings." And so the path, I believe, in genomic research should include a commitment, as you have heard this afternoon, to rebuilding trust, repairing the breaches of past injustices, and ensuring a future where all lives are equally valued in the pursuit of healing and scientific advancement. This should be what you've heard today should be a powerful reminder that not only for scientific reasons, but as a matter of justice, equity, and faithful stewardship, we should all be cognizant of God's creation. By aligning research practices with the values you've heard today, we will fulfill a higher calling to serve humanity in a way that honors the diversity of God's creation and ensures the benefits of science are shared by all. And if you remember nothing else, remember this: the pathway forward to true equity in genomic research requires all of us. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
We have time to take a couple questions. So, if there's any questions from the audience? I see one question here. Oh, we got it. And then there's one question here, then we'll take the one that's read. Is there a mic we can pass? We'll wing it.
I've got questions from the audience. One is, churches and mosques are the gatekeepers to the community. How do you gain the trust of the houses of worship?
Okay, can you all hear me? You say never give a Jackson a microphone. We're going to sing or dance or preach. Here comes the preaching. So Islam, I was raised as a Christian, so I feel comfortable, and I love Christianity. And of course I love Christ. Christ is a part of Islam. But what I found in Islam is that there are lots of rules. And I'm one of those people who needs rules. I need rules. Otherwise, I get pitiful and get distracted. So with the rules comes sets of guidelines for genomic testing, not explicitly genomic testing, but things like the idea of doing no harm and improving the quality of life and so forth. So for Islam, any new technology that comes in Islam, we evaluate it with respect to the rules that come from the Quran and the Hadith. And then those rules then become the guideline. If it's satisfactory with that, then we go for it. If it's not, then we reject it. So it's pretty straightforward. There's a project I was doing with some pigs when I was at Berkeley. And I asked the imam, the sheikh, is it okay for me to use pigs? He says, you're not eating them. And I said, no. In fact, he said, if that research, that experiment on the pig is able to improve the quality of human life, then it becomes wajib, it becomes required for you to work on that pig.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. We've got another question for the panelists. How do you account for the faith community who may not participate in these studies, like Jehovah's Witnesses?
As opposed to speaking to a specific religion, I will speak about I've learned a lot through our work with tribal engagement, for example. And even the work recently, I had an opportunity to engage with some researchers from East and West Africa across Cameroon looking at sickle cell research. What we still know in certain communities and in certain countries in Africa is that there are still cultural practices where giving one blood is still sacred. So we have to honor that as researchers. I can't come in there with my Western culture, my Western practice saying, if you don't give me your blood, I won't have research to do. That's why things like artificial intelligence and machine learning become really important. That's why scientists like this young man are so important, because for populations who may have certain religious beliefs or cultural beliefs where they may not donate their blood, I'm looking forward to a scientific day when certain scientists can create polygenic risk scores, predictive modeling, truly use artificial intelligence and machine learning to do things that we may not be able to do because everyone may not be able to donate their sample for cultural reasons and cultural purposes that we have to honor. We have to honor those things.
Thank you so much. Another question. Is this model of engaging faith communities in biomedical research something that is being taught in universities and divinity schools?
Not yet, but it's in the works. If Dr. Cunningham has anything to say about it, it will be. We have a whole methodology. We call it the honest broker methodology of communication. And I said it centers around training, particularly clergy and other people of faith, about how to message and talk about these high science concepts with the lay communities that they serve. So I'm hopeful that that's in the future. That could be a college curriculum at the university level, and maybe something that all students that go into health sciences major have to take as a part of more awareness around diversity, equity, and inclusion as they deliver care. So I'm very excited about those prospects.
I do want to shout out to Hampton University. They have the first PhD program it's PhD in religion and community engagement.
Wonderful.
That is a major step forward. So let's give Hampton University a shout out
Absolutely.
for that first PhD program in community engagement and religion. And McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago just hired its first African-American president, Dr. Maisha Handy, who's very interested in that intersection of faith and community. So you see a change happening at our faith, in our training institutions.
Well, I'm going to have to work on the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University, my alma mater. Last question, and very briefly for all three of the panelists, please. What are your hopes for the future of biomedical research in the African American community, particularly as it relates to health equity? Very briefly, closing comments. Closing thought.
I'll start. My hope is that we participate at all levels. So not only as participants in the research, but actual participants in doing the science and making the discoveries and innovating and making the new companies that spin out of that. I want to see the participation from our community increase writ large, because what we've seen is just like with the building of this country, we have a vital role to play. As people of color, citizens of color, no matter our history of oppression, the spirit that God put in us and our ancestors imbued us with, the strength that they imbued us with, give us that capacity to be major contributors to help us as a country win the future. So that's what I hope to see as participation.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima, and then last word would be Dr. Watson. Briefly.
You know, briefly is hard for me. In 1994, when we were being excluded from the Human Genome Project, a couple of us got together and wrote a manifesto for African American participation in genomic research. And what we said was exactly what Dr. Cunningham has said, that we want African American engagement in all aspects of the research, not simply as subjects, but also as defining the research questions, as principal researchers, as technologists. You know, so if we're at every level, then we're assured of equity. If we don't see ourselves at every level, we will not have equity.
And I envision a day, and let's give a round of applause to that. I envision a day where your zip code will not be more important than your genetic code. Yeah. Where you live should not determine if you live or how long you live. And I imagine a day when precision medicine will be precise for all of us. That when you go to the doctor, it won't be determined by your insurance, whether you're at an academic medical center, or you're at the NCI designated cancer center, but the fact that you go to get care, I envision a day that you will get that care, and that care will be precise for you, and that all of us would have played a role in making sure that that happened.
Great, let's give this dynamic panel another round of applause. We are so grateful and would ask again that you go tell somebody about what you heard this afternoon. Again, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Courage must not skip this generation. when we speak to the importance of genomic research in the African American community and beyond to achieve true health equity for all. It requires who? All of us. One more time. All of us. And one more time. All of us. Thank you so much. We wish you grace, peace, but most of all, power. Thank you.
Thank you to our moderator. And I want to invite you all to join us on, is Deidre ready? Okay, Deidre, we're ready for you.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. Yes, thank you to all our panelists and moderators today. We hope you have enjoyed today's presentations and worthwhile information from all our presenters. And now, we would like to hear from you. Please use your phones to scan the QR code on the screen to complete a brief assessment of today's event. The feedback that you provide will help us to plan future events like this one. And while you are taking your survey, we would like to offer a few announcements. On behalf of all of us, Research Programs Division of Engagement and Outreach, the Faith-Based Genetics Research and Institute, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, we thank you for spending part of your afternoon with us. And we invite you to continue the conversation by visiting the Visit the All of Us Journey, which will be occurring this week at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Annual Legislative Conference on September 11th, 12th, and 13th. To learn more about that event, please use the QR code or visit joinallofus.org/tour. And to learn more about the All of Us Research Program or to enroll, you can join the conversation by going to allofus.nih.gov or researchallofus.org, or once again, please scan the QR code on the screen. Lastly, we'd like to invite you to enjoy the exhibits of the museum, including the Way Out of Nowhere exhibit on the 3rd floor. Thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of your day.